And, and it sort of is a proof of this proposition in a sense, because I think there are more guitars collected in the world than there should be, and eBay and the habit-forming nature of eBay is, in my case, synthesizers, not guitars. But the next level, and this is something that I've worked with a great deal, and so have most of the people in the room, which is promotional schemes that are using engagement marketing, what I used to call on my old marketing blog, marketing enthusiasm. And it was an argument I once had with Russell Davis, not really an argument, but he said, you will never engage me with a headache tablet. You know, this engagement marketing is all very fine for Apple and Nike. And I said, well, yes, you will, but you have to go out into the enthusiasm. So if you talk about exam stress or period pain or other issues that sit around that market, you can have and you know, one of the first great branded communities on the internet was in fact for nappies, the Pampers Parenting Institute, and it was one of the precursors to Mumsnet, where people could hang around and just talk about their worries and their feelings and what they were doing and practical tips and other stuff. So you can engage really well at this level, I think, if you're any brand. You just have to be generous in terms of thinking about the meal and not necessarily thinking about the stock cube. And there are all sorts of very standard things that you can use in here. So collection and targets is a very common mechanic. I'll show examples of these. Group buy, influence and trade is a very current one. I'll show Groupon. Being the first is always a great thing in game schemes and community spirit. So examples of that, Pepsi Refresh, obviously I think you know, if there's a sales promotion of the year award, this is probably it, and this was their Super Bowl budget, but 30 million people engaged online with a local community fundraising community spirit scheme. I think it's a great demonstration of their long-running proposition that they are at the taste of a new generation. They're just on trend. That's their thing, and Coke's always slightly off. Sorry if Coke are in the room. But that's Pepsi's point of view about their brand, and they express it well in this promotion. Groupon, which my .com friends tell me is the hottest startup of the year, got 30 million through Union Square Ventures, and if you're in that sort of space, you know, even Union Square Ventures, you know, etc. What they do is they enable you to group buy. So here is the proposition that if how many of us? Well, 44 have bought. So if 100 of us, let's say, in Chicago buy the Wired Fitness Camp, we can get it at this price. And it is the year of coupons anyway, but they brought back that the Priceline group buying thing. And there's a lot of gaming mechanics in here. The urgency will make you buy a fitness course in the way that you'll buy a gym in January for the same reason, the time scale. They're just using the mechanics really well to promote businesses. We're getting on to, you know, this is the queue in, this is a picture that has almost everything, really, and everything wrong with it as well in terms of consumerism and consuming the world. But this is the queue to buy the iPad in the glorious spaceship of the Westfield Shopping Centre. Sorry again if you're here, for either of you, Apple or Westfield. I'll gladly work with you on your sustainability policies. But the thing is, and going back to the Harry Potter games and the sleepovers, they've turned the launch of something into an interactive game. And everybody's talking about, you know, I met my friend from the digital agency, and he'd come back from the trip to the States, and he's demonstrating his iPad. And it's just starting to understand how to promote something, in this case, a launch, with gaming mechanics. And one of my clients, The Big Knit, it was just came out of saying, what could we do about fuel poverty, and that thing on the radio about poor people getting cold in the winter, but arranging this, you know, everything should be wrong with this in terms of we're going to have knit-ins in Sainsbury's and eat restaurants, you know, etc. But it's just glorious, because the brilliant thing about Innocent is they just follow right through to the end of the line and come out with something brilliant. And they're also great with language. Buy one get one tree was another favourite, and you know. And they gave 50p on every one of those bottles to... So the world of sales promotions, I think, has become one of the most creative spaces, and that definitely wasn't true at some point a while ago, although Tango in the 90s also did very interesting sales promotions. Game brand innovation, so the way in which gaming has been built into product design, that is something Russell Davis has been writing about quite a bit more recently, but the way that actually interaction is increasingly designed into products and services, and that's obviously possible even if you have the most inert thing in the world, where people interact with you in the sorts of spaces that you have on the web, and we've now heard you've got on Channel 4. And so you have interaction games, service system games, real-time information, habit and ritual design. I've given that as a separate set of headings, but here's some examples. So run against other people whilst wearing your Nikes, and also using a piece of stuff that was originally embedded in your what do they call it now? iTouch or something. But anyway, you don't now do it on your iPhone using GPS. But run against somebody while you're running on your own. It's a great gaming proposition. This thing my mother has in her car, and my mother and technology. I was worried about my mother's in-car technology in the previous one, because she was one of the earliest adopters of sat-nav at a stage when it would literally get her to drive across ploughed fields. And she lives in the country, and she is very compliant. If a voice tells her in a nice voice to go and do something, she will drive into a ditch. But she now has this thing that tells her how eco she's driving, and she gets colour-coded feedback, so the thing literally glows if she's putting her foot down too much, which, believe me, I mean, it would never happen with my mother. She's it's better. My son and I call it Gran Nav when she's not driving. She's constantly issuing instructions. This is something I worked with, and I'm on the board of Onzo, lovely little red dot, a winning innovation, which is a home energy monitor, and all sorts of little psychological twists and tweaks. So that thing in the right-hand corner is showing you that you're on base load, which means is that your fridges and freezer are switched on, but all the lights and other things are switched off and nothing's left on standby. So now, when you're leaving the house, you can check your Onzo to see if you've switched everything off. And it's the way that I love it when technology starts to come into mediating human relationships. I think that is a really rich space. And I did some work years ago for Sony Ericsson, and my summary of where the new generation have got to with mobiles is they're using it as as a smarter thing than a doorbell. And as the kids explain to me, you don't want to talk to their mum, you want them to come to the door, and so you text them to say you're here. And this way of mediating sort of, and so this is how you can take gaming out of just your internet site into service and interaction, and the things people can do to check prices in stores or sustainability and all this other stuff, the world of apps. The other thing, because I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I did spend a lot of time on this one point, trying to understand the way that retail had been programming the experiences, and the way, why, the question was, why is Starbucks so brilliant, and how it has reprogrammed our behaviour and created a whole new sort of retail leisure category, I think, well beyond the coffee itself. I remember when we talked to Mary Portis's company in the mid-90s, and we were talking about Clark Shop, and their first concept was forget the windows, actually think about the way that kids try shoes on. Shouldn't you build a little assault course so they can climb over them and climb up walls and other stuff, because they're not going to walk around sedately like adults. And that really interactive way about creating retail experiences, I would draw into my theme that everything's a game. Well, it's retail experiences really, isn't it? But this is the area where because I do a lot of strategy consulting, and there's a lot of this in my current book, actually looking at the market as a game, and saying that we've reached the point in the mid-90s where people started, for instance, watching the finance bit of the news for the first time and wondering what would happen to their mortgage. And I was working with Midland HSBC Bank at the time, and starting to brief people who'd become home economists. And you see the same thing with the home expert on health and so forth. And people interacting with information. All you do in a game is you interact with information and you progress through stages and you achieve, but fundamentally you have the sense of agency. You're not a passive marketing audience telling you what you should do. You're a player. So crowdfunding and owning, these are some of the hot current models, and whenever you brief a digital agency, you'll get one of these at the moment, I think, because they're just, with technology, it's all about what can we do next. Co-creation, you've seen a great example of that today. Co-production, and also in a recent client project, we were talking about reviving the idea of consumers as agents. Why isn't somebody selling my product, which they love, through every Facebook interaction and other stuff, and creating a new world? And it's a very ethical product, so you do get really strong advocates in the market where I was working there. Competition and community, and I think it's always about a balance. I've written a whole book on cooperation, but actually there's always a balance of who's actually raised more in the sponsored run and so forth within the most altruistic systems. And prediction markets, I'd argue now that every market's a prediction market. I'll give you an example of that. So the marketer's game, I think the iPhone and Android are putting out on their own as this sort of Ivan versus G.I. Joe clash of the platforms, and my geeky friends keep telling me that Android's winning and Apple will tell you something else, but we're becoming spectators in this game. When we pull out phones in the pub and stuff, we're having this conversation. One of the great embodiments of this was Hollywood Stock Exchange, one of the first successful games on the internet that all the college kids played in the mid-90s. And the thing was, it was a fantasy league. You backed stars, and then you tracked the real-world performance of them in movies and stuff, and people started adding layers of gambling onto there and other stuff, which made it even more interesting. But I think in hot markets, they are actually already prediction markets. People are betting with what one's going to win. And I bought a Prius, and I was part of a much bigger conversation than fuel economy in terms of what I was getting into. I was at the zoo recently, and there was this huge mob of people around some part of the zoo which isn't usually very popular, and someone said what's over there, and we sort of peered over and we heard this Geordie dad say, "Look son, compare the meerkats." Meerkats are the hot stars of the animal world at the moment. Actually, what I want to talk about here was actually the way that markets are being gamed by intermediaries. This is one of the first big predictions that the digital management consultancy people made. They called it disintermediation, re-intermediation. But what they meant is that markets will be increasingly driven by the money supermarkets of this world, the intermediaries. And your ability now not to rely on Tesco's price checker, but actually increasingly to be told if it's cheaper up the road and other stuff through your digital media and so forth. And honestly, you're not going to do that on cornflakes, but for planned purchases and other stuff, those things are going to be increasingly active parts of your everyday shopping. And I know this because I know people who are working on that model, and there'll be lots more. Betfair, which is fantastic. Zopa is the ethical version of this, which is peer-to-peer banking. Betfair is just the proposition that will be a thin bit in the middle, and basically the casino and the punter are both punters. And basically on Betfair, one side bets that the horse will lose and the other side bets that they will win, and Betfair takes an arrangement fee, and it's a genius thing, but it is an economic model. And increasingly, the creative thing when you're working with innovative companies is actually you're looking at their business concept and their business model as as the driver of all the other innovations. And this is just one example of this. And the market is a game. I mean, basically, the fact that there's an enormous market for apps is the most compelling thing about the thing in my pocket, which hasn't buzzed yet, which is Wi-Fi in demand. It's been 40 minutes. The new BlackBerry. Of course, BlackBerry is the old BlackBerry and stuff. So. I think I would just hold up that framework and go, how can we apply game mechanics? So this is principally for the people who are looking for an idea for your next workshop. I've genuinely used this sort of gaming stuff just to unpack stuff and to think more interestingly every level, from web and interface design, sales promotion, actually building new service levels in, when I've worked, for instance, with IKEA on their online service, or just looking for new business models. I think you can apply gaming at all those levels. And I think my point today was gaming isn't just some tricks for your website. It's actually a deep metaphor, which is different than the old metaphor with sender, receiver, message. And it's much more involving and plays to a world where consumers are driving markets. This would be something in that workshop, is just to go, here's a load of ingredients of any common game, which you could put in your Wii. Actually, what's our equivalent, and how could we spark off this? So, I know these things will be circulated, but I would use something like this. I'll put it on cards or something and just play with it. And half of it won't fit, but you'll find bits of it, perhaps, that will. And finally, just to celebrate the passing of one of the great games marketing franchises of recent years. I mean, the great thing about Big Brother is it just embodied everything that David was talking about, but it was just a great big game. And the fact that we knew people, disturbingly, several people who were on it, but everybody felt like they knew somebody who was on it, and it was much more. It was a market as game franchise, and I just want to mourn its passing. And then move on to what was the new one that we were watching? I can't remember. There you go. I'm not. I'm watching Spooks, but there you go. So fantastic. That was me. Thank you very much.